All right, you ready for this? We're going deep on a concept that might just flip your whole worldview on its head. It's all about the new Christology, a lecture Neville Goddard gave back in 1967. Now, this might surprise you, but stick with us here.
It's definitely thought-provoking, that's for sure.
Uh-huh.
And while it might seem a little, well, unusual at first, as we dig into it, you'll see how powerful this perspective can be.
Exactly, and the core of it all. Goddard's idea that Christ isn't some figure from the past, he's not external to you. Instead, get this, Christ is actually your own wonderful human imagination. Just let that sink in for a sec.
Yeah, that takes a minute to wrap your head around. So
Yeah.
what we're trying to do today is really break down what Goddard meant by that, like on a practical level. If he's right, what does that mean for actually making your dreams a reality?
And he didn't just see this as some abstract idea either. It was the key, he believed, to creating the life you want. He even said understanding this is more valuable than billions spent on trying to fix things from the outside, like throwing money at poverty, because it's a power that's already in you, right there, waiting to be tapped into. So let's start with how Goddard even arrived at this idea of Christ as imagination. What's the basis for it?
Well, he actually gets it from how he interprets Scripture, specifically John 14:6. The verse that says, "No one comes to the Father except through me." But Goddard's take, me isn't some historical figure. It's actually referring to your own human imagination as that pathway to connect with the source of everything, the Father.
Yeah.
So your ability to imagine is like a direct line to creation itself.
Whoa, okay. That's a pretty different way of looking at it. And he brings in William Blake, the poet, to back this up, right? Talking about Jerusalem and that whole Tower of Babel story. What's the connection there?
So think about the Tower of Babel, this symbol of humanity's confusion, our inability to understand the divine. Blake saw that as us not recognizing the divine body as the human imagination. In fact, in Jerusalem, he even has this line, Babel mocks, saying, "There is no God or Son of God, that thou, O human imagination, O divine body, art all a delusion, but I know thee, O Lord." He's straight up calling his own imagination Lord. It's about realizing the divine is within you, that power to imagine.
So instead of looking outside, it's about realizing everything comes from within, from our ability to imagine
Right.
things.
And Goddard takes it even further, saying that life, literally everything we experience, is just an activity of imagining. Even waking up, he suggests, is your imagination coming back online, becoming aware again. It's like the world is this constant canvas for your imagination to work on.
Wow. Okay. So our imagination is shaping everything around us all the time. That's kind of a mind-blowing thought. So how did Goddard suggest we actually use this in our daily lives?
Well, he had this great example. He said, if you forget something, instead of getting all stressed out, try saying, "Thank you, Father, that you always hear me." But remember, Father here means your own imagination, the source. He said doing that would often bring the memory right back. So next time you lose your peace or something, try it out. Acknowledge that inner creative power and see what happens.
Interesting. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about Goddard's views on poverty, because he had a really unique take on that, especially through this lens of the new Christology.
Yeah, he made this bold claim that all the external efforts to fight poverty, they're ultimately going to fail. Why? Because they don't address this core misunderstanding of our own power to create our reality. Giving aid might help temporarily, but it doesn't get to the root of the problem, which is people not realizing they have this power to shape their own lives. It's about empowering people from the inside out, not just handing them things.
And he had that story about his neighbor in Barbados, right? To
Yeah.
kind of drive this point home. What happened there?
Oh yeah, this is a good one. So this neighbor was getting free milk, but when the free milk stopped, even temporarily, she got super upset, like she was entitled to it. Goddard used this to show how dangerous it can be to foster dependence. Like, if you don't understand your own inherent power, external solutions will only go so far. He said the real shift happens when you realize the source of all the phenomena of life is in him. That source is his own wonderful human imagination, who is Jesus Christ. It's about recognizing that power within, not looking for someone else to solve your problems.
And it sounds like he had a bone to pick with traditional churches, too. What was his issue with them?
Yeah, he was pretty critical of their focus on a historical Christ, this figure from the past. Goddard felt like that totally missed the point. He believed Christ is actually a living presence within each of us, as our own imagination. And by not teaching that, he thought churches were keeping people powerless, not realizing their true potential. So it's not about some distant deity, it's about the power you already have right inside you.
So this brings us to how faith, worry, and imagination all connect in Goddard's teaching. How did he tie those together?
He said worry is a clear sign of a lack of faith, not necessarily in some external God, but in the power of your own imagination. Yeah, he had this great line, if you worry, you don't believe in your imagination. Think about it. If you really believed you could create anything with your mind, what would you have to worry about?
That makes sense. And he brings up John 14 again. Let not your heart be troubled. In my Father's house are many mansions. How did he view those mansions?
He saw them as different states of consciousness, not literal places. It's like your imagination is constantly creating these new realities, different ways of being, and they're all available to you. So it's all about realizing you can shift your reality just by shifting your state of consciousness through your imagination.
That leads us to what Goddard called imaginal acts, consciously using our imagination to shape our reality. What exactly did he mean by that?
Exactly. And he had this incredible story to illustrate it about a time when he needed to get back to New York from Barbados but couldn't find a way. It's a perfect example of how imaginal acts can affect the outside world.
Yeah, that one's a classic. Can you remind us what he actually did in that situation?
So we couldn't get a flight, right? So what does he do? He goes to his hotel room, sits down, and starts vividly imagining the entire journey. He feels the boat rocking as he's taken out to the ship. He sees his brother carrying his daughter on board. He feels himself walking up the gangplank. And then he even turns around in his mind and looks back at Barbados as the ship sails away. And he did this over and over whenever his mind wandered, until it felt completely real.
And what happened? Did it actually work?
Well, just a little while later, the phone rings. It's the travel agent telling him there's been a cancellation. A spot just opened up on a ship leaving at the end of April, exactly when he'd imagined it. Goddard was adamant that his imagining was the direct cause of that cancellation. His inner world literally shaped the outer world.
Incredible. And then he ties this back to scripture again, doesn't he? What's the connection he makes?
He quotes that verse, Jesus Christ is the source of all phenomena. By him all things were made. And then he throws out this question. If Jesus Christ makes everything, and I know what I did, is he not my wonderful human imagination? He saw this whole experience as proof that imagination is this incredible creative power, and he equates that with Christ himself.
Wow. So how can we practically apply this? How do we start living in the end, as Goddard put it, and make our desires a reality?
He talks about the Father's house as all those different states of consciousness we talked about. So first you got to get clear on what you actually want, that specific state of being you desire. Then you got to step into that state in your imagination, fully immerse yourself in it.
He had that metaphor about sheep and a shepherd
Yeah.
to explain this whole process.
Yeah, he compares your desires to sheep and your imagination to the good shepherd. So the shepherd's job is to gather those sheep, your desires, into the fold, which represents your consciousness. And you do that through focused imagining, experiencing the feeling of your desires being fulfilled, like they're already real.
So it's not about waiting for things to happen in the outside world first, right?
Yeah.
We got to imagine it first.
Right. Signs follow, they do not precede, he said.
Right.
The process is to first get into that state in your imagination, feel it, give thanks for it, remember, thank your Father, means acknowledge your imaginative power and then let it go. Don't try to control the how, just trust that the outer world will reflect your inner reality.
What about the whole question of timing? Like, how long does it take for these imaginal acts to actually manifest in our lives?
He used the example of planting a seed. There's always that time between when you plant the seed and when it actually sprouts. Same with desires. Some might come quickly, others might take longer. He was big on patience, saying don't worry about the time, just trust that the seed's been planted in your consciousness through your imagining.
And he seemed really adamant that knowing how things are created through imagination is more important than the things themselves. Why was that?
Because if you understand that your imagination is the source, even if you lose something, you can always create it again. He saw people getting so attached to the stuff, the external manifestations, that they forgot about the power inside that created it in the first place. And that inner knowing gives you a sense of security, like you're always in control.
So what was Goddard's own method? Like, step by step, how did he say to use imagination to make things happen?
He laid it out pretty clearly. First, get super clear on exactly what you want. Then, ignore any evidence that says it's not possible. Cultivate this unwavering belief in your imagination, which he saw as Christ. In your imagination, assume you already have what you want. And lastly, don't get hung up on how it'll happen. Just let it go.
He keeps coming back to that example of trying to remember something and then saying, thank you. How does something so small fit into this whole process of creation?
It's like a microcosm of that trust in your imagination. When you can't remember something, instead of stressing out, You turn inward, acknowledge your imagination as the source of all knowledge, and thank it for the answer. It's an act of faith that lets the information surface, a simple way to practice that trust in your creative power.
Sounds like he truly believed our imagination is limitless, but that we often limit ourselves.
Exactly. He said, your financial, social, and intellectual pictures are as limited as you make them. He believed we can create anything, but we hold ourselves back with limiting beliefs and self-doubt. But the good news is, those limitations are all in our heads, so we can overcome them.
And he had that practice he suggested doing right before sleep, right, to kind of reinforce this whole thing.
Yeah, he really emphasized that. Before you fall asleep, spend time in your imagination, feeling as if you already have what you want, and thanking the Father, your imagination, for it. He even quoted, I am infinity, and all thine are mine, and mine are thine. It's all about impressing your subconscious mind with that feeling of already having what you want. Just fall asleep as the person you want to be, he said, without worrying about the details.
But of course, this is all pretty radical stuff. Some people are probably going to be skeptical. How did Goddard handle that?
He told this story about a guy who used his teachings to move to California. But even after getting what he wanted, the guy still wasn't totally convinced that his imagination was what did it. It's like sometimes, even when we see results, it's hard to fully grasp the power of our minds. He also brought up this quote from Herbert Hoover about how the rise and fall of nations comes down to the ideas in people's minds. So it's connecting individual imagination to this larger collective consciousness.
Interesting. And what about those who just flat out reject this whole thing, even trying to make fun of it?
Goddard noticed that sometimes people put others down to feel superior. He pointed out that real growth doesn't come from making others feel small. It comes from raising your own consciousness, expanding your own understanding. It's like your reality is I am. Raise your consciousness and you raise yourself, but you haven't risen when you feel the need to push another down by claiming I am better than. Focus on your own journey. Don't get caught up in what other people think.
So, to wrap this all up, what was the ultimate takeaway? What was Goddard really trying to get across with this whole new Christology idea?
He wanted us to completely rethink how we view our own imagination. He called for this new Christology, basically a new way of thinking about our own minds. Because he believed recognizing your imagination as the creative force of the universe is the key to unlocking your full potential, to solving problems both personally and globally. It's a huge shift in perspective, but a powerful one.
It really is. So if you're listening, if your own mind really is this limitless creative force, what's possible for you? What will you choose to imagine? That's something to think about long after we're done here.